experienced some medical or dental care in her entire life. A fact that could hint into her background. She visited inside the U.S. given its unusual technique. And the girl had no fillings or orthodontic work typical of American teens, reinforcing the idea that she might have come from factors mostly filed away for future reference.
She has a few years left on that contract.
Provided further clues. Because at the time of discovery, she was fully dressed in everyday attire that would not have been out of place for a 1970s teenager. Perhaps that some items were ill-fitted or quote-unquote masculine. She wore products on the inside. So it looked like a racing or automotive jacket, and investigators tried to trace it, but they soon learned it had been a promotional item produced in limited quantity and not traceable to any particular owner. And on her feet were brown shoes with rippled soles. And she also was wearing blue knee-high socks, a white bra, and blue underwear. And everything she wore seemed to have been purchased off the rack. So it was nothing bespoke or extremely distinctive, save the red jacket and the personalized keychain charms. But the overall impression was that of a normal American teen or young woman of the late 70s, perhaps one who was traveling or had run away, wearing practical clothes for comfort. And one by one, each piece of physical evidence was cataloged, and photographs of the girl's face were taken. And because her facial features were still mostly intact, despite her mere eyebrows for any teenage girl fitting her description, but not a match to Jane Doe. And they also sent her fingerprints to the FBI's national database, but unfortunately the prints turned up nothing. And she had never been fingerprinted by law enforcement or any government agency that reported to the FBI, so she had no record. So the initial phase of the investigation presented a giant puzzle. Here was a young woman with tan lines suggesting a life in sunny climates, found dead far from home, wearing a mishmash of clothes and carrying trinkets from roadside stops. And she shared a humble last meal with a stranger who might also have been her executioner. There were no immediate answers, only questions echoing in the minds of investigators and townspeople alike. Who was Jane Doe, and how did she come to be in Caledonia? And who murdered her so mercilessly?
AI is here and already rewriting the rules of business. The organizations have been.
And why? I want to take a minute to talk about my cat. And she is frankly the most adorable thing ever, and she is hilarious because every morning at 8:30 a.m., not 8:32, not 8:25, 8:30, she will yell and yell and yell and yell until I give her food. And she looks forward to feeding so much because of Smalls, which is the sponsor of today's video. And listen, my cat simply cannot live without Smalls. And for a limited time, you get 60% off your first order. Plus, free shipping when you head to smalls.com/CCCN. For those of you who don't know, Smalls has protein-backed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients that you find in your own fridge. And it's delivered right to your door. So convenient. And that's like Cash.com named Smalls their best overall. And starting with Smalls is easy. Just share info about your cat's diet, health, and food preferences. And then Smalls puts together a personalized sample for your cat. So no more picking between random brands at the store. Smalls has any food to satisfy your cat's cravings. And my cat's favorite flavor right now is the chicken recipe. And I'm not gonna lie, I legitimately did a taste test when I put her own and the Smalls side by side, but she immediately went to the Smalls and we never looked back. But since making the switch, she has been Smalls the best cat food. And after switching Smalls, over 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvement. And that's a big deal. And the team at Smalls is so confident that your cat will love Smalls that you can try it risk-free. That means they will completely refund it if your cat does not like the food, which I know that'll happen. But at least you have that response. So what are you waiting for? Give your cat the food it deserves. And for another time, because we're a CCCN listener, get 60% off your first order and free shipping. When you head to smalls.com/CCC, that's 60% off your first order and free shipping when you go to smalls.com/CCC. Thank you so much to Smalls for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. Let's get back to it. So from the very start, the Caledonia Jane Doe case weighed heavily on the hearts of investigators involved. And one man in particular would become the steadfast guardian of Jane Doe's memory. John York, a Livingston County deputy sheriff, who was one of the first officers on the scene that November morning. And John York was deeply moved by the sight of the murdered girl and the tragedy of her anonymity. And as the years went on, York's career advanced, and he was elected Livingston County Sheriff in the 1980s, and he held that office until 2013. And throughout those years, he refused to let that Jane Doe case fade away. And Sheriff York made sure that Callie Doe remained in active investigation. She was called Callie Doe because of where she was found, reminding his department and the public that this girl was never forgotten. And York's dedication was both professional and deeply personal, and he often visited that unidentified girl's grave, talking to her in his thoughts and asking her for forgiveness that they hadn't found the name of her killer, saying, quote, "What did we forget? What did we overlook? Here's a child shot, dumped roadside, shot again, stripped of identification. Somebody has to give that child justice," unquote, he would remark, emphasizing the sense of obligation he felt. And in his words, quote, "You don't think that kid deserves some justice," unquote. So the case was a promise he meant to keep. And in the earliest years after 1979, York and the investigative team pulled out all the stops to identify the girl and hunt down the murderer. But with no name to start from, the first priority was giving Callie Doe back her identity, since one of the biggest parts of solving this case is knowing the victim, as Sheriff Thomas Daughtry would say. And in 1979 and the early 1980s, this meant painstakingly checking missing persons reports by hand, reaching out to departments near and far, and appealing in the media for anyone who knew the girl who vanished to come forward. And leads poured in by the dozens and then hundreds. And according to Sheriff York, over 10,000 tips and leads would ultimately be examined in the course of the investigation, which is a staggering figure that illustrates just how many possibilities the team had to consider and how determined they were to chase down any hint of a clue. And early on, investigators prepared flyers detailing the girl's description and clothing and mailed them to police departments all across the United States, Canada, and even overseas. So this was a massive pre-internet outreach effort to see if any agency had a similar cold case or a missing girl who might match. And John York's law enforcement students even assisted in stuffing envelopes and addressing them, learning firsthand how a real case was pursued with dogged determination. And the team compared notes with missing persons databases, but the late 1970s and 80s lacked a digital centralized national system, so it was like searching for a needle in a haystack by candlelight. And sadly, none of the countless inquiries produced a name for Callie Doe. And realizing the killer might not be a local either, investigators explored truck stops, rest areas, and highway records. Because Caledonia sits not far from the interstate highway and the thruway, so the victim and her killer were traveling, maybe a trucker or gas station attendant had seen something. So they canvassed diners and gas stations asking if anyone recalled a curly-haired girl or a man with glasses. And some promising information did emerge. A few long-haul truck drivers reported possibly seeing a teen girl hitchhiking along the highway in that area around the time of the murder. And this fueled the theory that Jane Doe had been hitchhiking her way through New York, which fit the narrative of a runaway or a traveler. However, without confirmation of who she was, these sightings remained frustratingly vague leads. And they suggested a scenario, but not a name. So by the end of 1980, the case had gone cold in terms of identifying the victim, because despite the extensive efforts, no family had come forward to claim her, and no missing persons reports in any database matched her unique combination of characteristics. So it was just heartbreaking, and it seemed as if no one was looking for this girl, at least not in the right places. So with great reluctance, Livingston County authorities arranged for Callie Doe's burial about a year after her death. So in 1980, she was laid to rest in Greenmount Cemetery under a headstone that read, "Left to forget, unidentified girl, November 1979, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." Maybe you'll be missed. Maybe you'll be found. Maybe it is someone who actually knows the space. Maybe you're being kind and not regardless of the economy. Maybe you're being recruited by another industry entirely. Maybe you started to feel like it. Maybe you're the CFO. Maybe you're the shipping your parents' president. The beautiful Shakespearean sentiment on the stone was a promise that although her name was unknown, she would not be forgotten by this community. A handful of locals and law enforcement officers advocated for her. So throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the sheriff's office continued to grind away at this case, checking every conceivable lead. If a teenage girl went missing anywhere in the country that even remotely fit the time frame and description, the team compared dental records, descriptions, if anything available to see if it could be matched to Kelly Jo. And thousands of law enforcement agencies were contacted over the years. And the case file bulged with correspondence and reports from all corners of the U.S. and even abroad, as Interpol and Canadian police were alerted just in case the victim was from outside the country. But still, every promising lead seemed to hit a dead end, and not a single missing persons report lined up with Caledonia's Jane Doe. It was as if she had never officially been reported missing at all, which is a deeply unsettling thought that implied she might have come from a troubled home or transient life where no one realized or cared that she was gone. But investigators didn't give up, and the case even received some national media attention. A segment of the Caledonia Jane Doe aired on the popular TV program America's Most Wanted. And though America's Most Wanted usually focused on fugitives, they sometimes featured Jane or John Doe cases to drum up tips, and exposure would lead to a flurry of calls. And armchair detectives and psychics alike, but none provided the key to unlock Jane Doe's identity. So years went by, and by the early 2000s, the Caledonia Jane Doe case was the most extensive and expensive case in Livingston County's history, having occupied countless man-hours and resources. And Sheriff John York, true to his word, never closed the case, and his team carefully preserved all the evidence, from the red jacket and clothing to the bullet slug and the necklace. And these items remained in storage, awaiting any advancement that could help solve the mystery. And one persistent heartache was the idea that somewhere, surely, this girl had family or friends who missed her. How could it be that in all these years, no relative had come forward? So this led to much speculation. Perhaps she had been a runaway for a long time, and her family assumed she was living independently. Perhaps she had fallen through the cracks of the foster system or had no close kin to miss her. It was even possible that she might have not even been from the U.S. originally, and she could be a foreign teen brought to the States. So investigators considered every single scenario, and they kept Kelly Doe's dental records and later DNA profile on file, ready to compare against any new missing persons entries that might appear in the evolving national database. You know, my dogs are just pets. They're family. They're the ones who bring me at the door like I've been gone for years when it's only been about 10 minutes. So when it comes to their health and happiness, we don't mess around. So wanting to be absolute best for our dogs, we switch to Aldi. They offer fresh, protein-packed meals that offer human-grade ingredients, which is a huge win for my dog's health. And they offer 5 tasty recipes that are all slow cooked for top nutrition. And what really sold me is that these recipes are human-grade and backed by actual vet nutritionists. And the convenience is a game changer, because Aldi tailors meal plans to your dog's specific needs, age, weight, and activity level. And delivers perfectly portioned meals in mess-free packaging. No more guessing and no measuring. And they even include a scoop and a little storage container that they call a container. And it basically just keeps your fridge from smelling like a kennel. Plus, it is the Aldi app where you can get on-demand health screening and tap real experts whenever you need peace of mind. And they're using data from thousands of dogs to constantly improve their recipes. It's like having a nutritionist, chef, and vet all working together for your dog. But since switching to Aldi, their coats are shinier, dogs have way more energy, and the best thing is that all their digestion issues have cleared up, and that's a big issue. And their favorite right now is the beef recipe. They're the dogs who really have to dance whenever you have this. Like, the dog's well-being starts with their food, and that's why Aldi delivers fresh, human-grade food that your dog will love. You know what? It's wrong. So head to ollie.com/CCCM and tell them all about your dog and use code CCCM to get 60% off. You're welcome to new subscribers today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box. So if you're not completely satisfied for whatever reason, you will get your money back. So that's ollie.com and enter code CCCM to get 60% off your first box. Thank you so much to Ollie for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel, and let's get back to it. So as the murder investigation dragged on without a suspect, detectives also weighed the possibility that the killer might have been an interstate serial offender. Because the late 1970s and early 1980s saw numerous serial killers operating across the country, as we know, and many targeting young women and runaways. And it was only natural to question if Callie Doe had crossed paths with one of these predators. And in 1984, a startling development occurred, and that was Henry Lee Lucas, a drifter turned notorious serial killer, or self-proclaimed serial killer, and he confessed to murdering an unidentified girl in upstate New York. A story that seemingly matched the Caledonia case. And Lucas at the time was making headlines for confessing to hundreds of murders nationwide. He had been arrested in Texas and in custody was unloading tale after tale of homicidal exploits, some incredible and many others fantastical. Let me know if you want me to go into Henry Lucas on a different deep dive, because my God, is he special, and by special I mean is a horrifying human being. So when Lucas mentioned killing a girl in a cornfield in New York, investigators had to check it out. And he even wrote to his companion, Otis Toole. Again, I will deep dive on him as well as Henry Lucas, claiming they were together when they picked up a girl hitchhiking in Philadelphia and later shot her in a New York cornfield. So on the surface, it sounded like it could fit. Toole and Lucas were known to have traveled together and had been spotted in upstate New York in 1979. So could these two infamous killers have been responsible for Caledonia's Jane Doe? But upon investigation, authorities found Lucas's confession to be dubious at best. As Lucas was a known attention-seeking piece of shit who often fabricated stories to gain favor or notoriety. And in this case, he failed to provide specific details that weren't already public knowledge. The law enforcement could not place Lucas or Toole definitively in the Caledonia area at the right time, nor find any evidence beyond Lucas's own words to tie them to the crime. And many of Lucas's confessions were just outright lies. And he was actually dubbed the Confession Killer after it came to light he had been falsely claiming credit for murders he could not have committed. So the Texas Rangers eventually had to rescind many of the 200-plus cases that they thought Lucas stole, upon realizing he had been fed case details and was fabricating stories altogether. And Caledonia's Jane Doe was one of those. Predators that came under scrutiny was Christopher Wilder, a serial killer in 1984 who went on a multi-state spree abducting and murdering young women across the U.S.
Canada stands at a decisive crossroads. New maritime challenges globally, and the Arctic demands vision, strength, and aggression. The Canadian Patrol Silver.
But Wilder had ties to both Florida and New York and was known for his interest in car racing. And Sheriff York at one point speculated about Wilder because the victim's racing-style jacket was a type Wilder might own or distribute. And Wilder was actually hiding out in upstate New York in mid-1979, evading law enforcement on other charges. And it's important to note that Wilder was indeed in the region of the scenario. A preteen girl potentially lured by a charming older man was not unlike Wilder's known modus operandi in the years. However, Wilder could not be conclusively linked to the Caledonia case. And tragically, or conveniently, Wilder was killed in a shootout with police in 1984. And each time a serial killer was caught, the team behind Callie Doe would check their timelines, habits, and known victims against the details of the cornfield murder. So every possibility was run down. And by the early 2000s, after a quarter century, the case remained unsolved and the victim unnamed. But it was not shelved. Investigators, both old and new, continued to feel a sense of duty about Callie Doe. And in 2005, a new opportunity arose, because advances in forensic science were emerging that had the potential to do what old-fashioned detective work could not. So the team prepared to leverage cutting-edge techniques to finally crack the identity of their Jane Doe, even as search for her killer remained a daunting challenge. So by the mid-2000s, technology had caught up in ways that just breathed new life into many cold cases.
Wow, really? Betray. Shit.
Investigators made a difficult decision, and that was to exhume the remains of Jane Doe from her grave for advanced forensic testing. So with a court order in hand, the young girl's body was carefully disinterred from Greenmount Cemetery. And it had been 26 years since her burial, but modern science offered capabilities that had been science fiction in 1979. And the goal was twofold: extract a viable DNA profile from her remains and apply new forensic analysis techniques like isotope and pollen analysis to glean clues about her life and origins. And the exhumation was successful. And using bone and tooth samples, forensic experts managed to extract DNA from the victim's remains. And this was a major breakthrough, because at last they had a genetic fingerprint of the girl. And whilst it didn't instantly reveal her identity by any means, it laid the groundwork for a potential future match. And it also meant that if a relative of hers ever entered their DNA, the system could connect the dots. So having her DNA on file was lighting a beacon in the darkness, basically. And now there was hope that one day it might signal a match. And another advanced technique applied was forensic paleontology. And this is the analysis of pollen and spores trapped in the victim's clothing. In 2006, the girl's garments, which had been preserved in evidence all those years, on the props, were sent to a laboratory at Texas A&M University for pollen testing. And a palynology expert examined the microscopic pollen grains embedded in the fabric. The results were fascinating, because among the pollen types identified were oak, spruce, and birch, as well as casuarina, which is Australian pine. And oak trees are widespread, but spruce and birch pollen was notable because those particular species are common in the mountainous regions of California, not in western New York. And none of the spruce or birch pollen found on fir was present in a control sample from the cornfield itself, meaning she picked it up elsewhere. And the biggest clue of all was the Australian pine pollen, because this invasive tree grows in only a few places in the U.S., specifically South Florida, parts of South Texas, and 3 areas of California: North Bay, San Luis Obispo, and San Diego. Sorry if I did that wrong. An Australian pine cannot survive the winters in New York at all. So there was no doubt the victim had been in one of those warmer regions not long before she died. So the pollen evidence led researchers to construct a possible travel narrative. And they theorized that Jane Doe may have spent a considerable amount of time in Southern California or Florida, given the Australian pine pollen. And the presence of spruce and birch that matched California mountain species suggested that she might have traveled through the Sierra Nevada region at some point, perhaps headed east. So the investigators imagined a journey, maybe starting near the San Diego area, then moving through high-altitude areas, picking up spruce and birch, and eventually ending up in New York. Alternatively, Florida is still on the table, given Australian pine flourishes there and for notable suntan lines. And in 2012, a re-examination of the pollen data reconfirms that only California, Arizona, or Florida make sense as points of origin. In fact, science was echoing what the tan lines had first whispered, and that was that this girl came from far away. And alongside pollen, isotopic analysis was performed on her teeth and bones. And this technique analyzes chemical signatures like ratios of oxygen isotopes embedded in one's body that vary according to regional water supplies and diet, which is extremely interesting. And the early isotope tests on her tooth enamel indicated she likely spent her early childhood in the southern or southwestern United States. And later bone isotope analysis further supported that her life history included significant time in a warm climate region. So these subtle chemical clues aligned neatly with the pollen findings, pointing investigators to look west or south of New York when considering her identity. But the 2005 to 2006 forensic push didn't stop there. And the sheriff's office also engaged a forensic artist to help with a new facial reconstruction of Jane Doe. And in 2010, an artist named Carl Kopelman volunteered his skills to draw a lifelike reconstruction of the girl's face. And Kopelman used the war photos and autopsy measurements to create a color portrait that captured how Jane Doe might have looked in life. A pretty teen with feathered light brown hair, soft features, and a slight smile. And he even drew her wearing a red jacket and turquoise necklace as she had been found, to dog recognition. So its reconstruction is uploaded to the online databases, including NOM-US, which by 2010 had become a crucial tool for mapping missing and unidentified cases. And NOM-US allowed the public and law enforcement to access case profiles. So for the first time, Kelly Doe's information, physical stats, dental charts, DNA availability, and Callie's new portrait were all there on the internet, where anyone could stumble upon it and potentially make a connection. So these forensic advancements were a huge leaps forward. And by 2010, investigators knew much more about Jane Doe. She was almost certainly from a sunny southern or southwestern state, had likely traveled cross country, and had DNA and facial images available in national systems. But still, for all this progress, she frustratingly remained nameless. She was a girl with a story written in her bones and clothes, but her name was still missing from the narrative. And what the Sheriff's Department could not have predicted was that the final pieces of the puzzle would come not just from science, but from the emergence of a new kind of detective. Because while the forensic experts were hard at work in the labs, a parallel effort was growing on message boards and websites where amateur crime buffs took up the case of identifying Jane Doe. So the stage was set for the worlds of law enforcement and crowdsourced sleuthing to collide. And by the early 2000s, as the Caledonia Jane Doe investigation embraced new forensic techniques, another powerful tool was coming into play, and that was the internet. And true crime forums and online communities were forming and bringing together enthusiasts and amateur detectives from around the world. And these web sleuths found each other on sites like websleuths.com.
With our sense, we can access the monitoring department of the new building worksheet here, with intelligence. Introducing the 2026 Season President.
Doe Network and later on Reddit, pulling information on cold cases and unidentified remains. And the mystery of Kelly Doe naturally drew the attention of the growing community. And her case became one of the most talked about unsolved Jane Doe cases online, captivating a generation of armchair detectives determined to help where official investigations had stalled. So on websleuths.com, a massive thread dedicated to Caledonia Jane Doe case was started as early as the early 2000s. And over the years, it grew to over 100 pages of discussion, theories, and painstaking research. And users pored over every available detail: the clothing, the keychains, the dinner sightings, the forensic clues. And the forum members collaborated to generate hypotheses about Jane Doe's identity and background. And one of the most dedicated contributors was Carl Kopelman. And Kopelman discovered the Kelly Doe case through web sleuths in the late 2000s and became fascinated. He was a professional accountant by day, but he volunteered countless hours to help identify missing persons and does. And the web sleuths community also kept the case alive in the public eye. And it was a remarkable crowdsourcing effort years before crowdsourcing became a buzzword. And what made the web sleuths era special was not only the theorizing, but the bridge it formed between the public and law enforcement. By the 2010s, some investigators were watching these forums, and in certain cases, even directly engaging or seeking help from citizen sleuths. And the Doe Network worked in parallel, logging the Caledonia Jane Doe as case file 1UFNY. So the synergy of official forensic data and crowd-driven research created an environment ripe for the breakthrough. So the case that had languished for so long was about to be cracked open by the unlikeliness of alliances. A high school friend with an anything question, a volunteer web sleuth with an eye for faces, and detectives willing to listen. So the online community's collaborative efforts produced several compelling theories about Jane Doe's identity and life history, many of which we have briefly discussed. First, that she was a Florida runaway from a troubled home. Many noted the victim's deep tan lines and bikini lines and posited that she came from a warm, sunny state like Florida. Next, that she was from California or West Coast traveler, given the pollen evidence of Australian pine and mountain spruces, and some sleuths believed she had spent time on the West Coast.
Not to train stations remotely,
opportunity versus a known assailant. The debate raged whether her killer was a stranger, like a trucker or a serial killer picking up a random hitchhiker, or someone she knew, like a travel companion or a boyfriend. The fact that she ate dinner with the man and seemed at ease suggested to some that she might have trusted him, at least initially. But others argued that hitchhikers often accept meals from kind strangers, so it could still have been a chance encounter turned deadly. And the lack of obvious defensive wounds or escape made the motive a mystery. And the Websters floated ideas from a botched robbery to the man making in advance he rejected, leading to rage. And then there's the failed identification due to reporting lapses. Because some of the savvier Web sleuth members began to suspect that the reason Jane Doe hadn't been identified was that no official missing persons report was active for her. And this was possible, as families don't report a runaway because they assume she left intentionally, or reports get lost in the shuffle, and this theory would prove incredibly predictive. Essentially, they were searching for someone who should have been reported missing, but wasn't. So this was an ambitious and difficult task, finding a void rather than a record. But through all of this, the Web Sleuths community kept the case alive, and in some ways prepared the ground for the final breakthrough, because they had amassed a wealth of knowledge and a list of possible names. And one name in particular was about to emerge from obscurity.